the Grad Guys Podcast, the show that demystifies the competency-based interview process and settles interview anxiety by providing you with direction, guidance and support so you can interview with confidence. Hello everyone and welcome to the second Grad Guys Podcast. As you know, we're here to help anxious graduates succeed in interview, and we're here today to unlock the mystery around the STAR interview method. Now, some of you may have heard of this before: the situation, task, action, and result, the STAR model or STAR method. It's a really good way to answer competency-based questions, particularly as it stops you from waffling on. And it allows you to give a really full-rounded answer with a clear result. And it's a really good structured approach to answering not just competency-based questions, but really any interview question. But you'll probably come across it more so in a competency-based interview. Now, the interviewer will have set a number of competencies that they want you to evidence within that interview. So it's really important that you understand exactly what they're looking for in each question they put to you. Now, the majority of public sector interviews will normally give you an outline of the competency areas that they're going to be assessing you in. You can normally find this attached to the job description or on the website. Or if you do a little bit of research about the organisation, there's normally a framework that the interviewers are working towards. So that will really help you nail down exactly what competencies are being looked at and help you prepare even more for your interview and assist you in feeling a lot more confident about your interview and reducing that anxiety, because you kind of know what you're going to what to expect, really, what kind of questions could be asked of you, which is always a bonus. Now, obviously, I'm Ash, one of the grad guys here. I've got my colleague and fellow co-founder with me, Pete. Hi, Pete. How you doing?
Hi, Ash. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. All good.
Yeah, good.
Ready to go. I love a bit of star model.
Yeah, me too. I think this is one thing that we can really add some value, I think, here. We're quite well versed in using this method, so looking forward to getting to discuss it a bit more in detail. So we've just sort of given a really brief introduction about what the STAR method is and its use around competency-based interview questions. I just thought maybe we should start off with discussing what is a competency. So I'll hand it over to you, Pete, if you want to sort of go through what is a competency, what does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, when they see this, they hear this word competence and they see it in sort of the interview pack, they have a real panic on, because it's like, well, what is a competency? What does it mean? So to give you a bit of background, competencies, they're used extensively in the public sector because they're more of a standardized way of interviewing people, compared to the private sector, where you can be a bit more kind of innovative the way you interview people. This is very set criteria to make it fair and to make it and to demonstrate that you've already attained a certain skill, and you can demonstrate a certain skill, able to handle a certain situation rather than just talk a good game. You actually have to evidence what you would do. So competencies will be broken down into different categories. There'll be things such as leadership, values and ethics, diversity, professionalism, working with others, those sort of things. And they're all aimed at, and within those competencies, there's little subsections that of points that the interview will want you to hit to demonstrate that you have got good leadership skills, that you are professional, and that you can demonstrate diversity, working with others. And the whole point of it is to basically just ascertain that you can do these things before you've even got into the workplace. But I can hear you all thinking, I don't have any experience yet. I've just graduated. I don't have experience. How am I going to demonstrate it? And I think, I'm sure Ash, you'll agree on this, that it's really important. You don't have to have had a high-flying job to demonstrate these competencies. You don't have to have lots of work experience to demonstrate the competencies. You can demonstrate competency from volunteer work, from doing a Saturday job, from a sports club that you go to. You can demonstrate all these things without having vast amounts of work experience. It's how you present the example and how you hit those competency markers, which is important. Just to give you an example, a job I went for in the public sector, I had had little experience at the workplace, but I did work in a shoe shop, and I actually had a diversity question about challenging difficult behaviour, which is challenging someone's behaviour, which is a difficult question to kind of deal with. It's quite a difficult one. But if you think about it, you probably do it all the time. And I used an example from when I worked in the shoe shop in the canteen. A colleague of mine made a comment, what I would deem homophobic comment. And I explained to them, I sat them down, how that kind of comment could offend a lot of people, and how it wasn't appropriate for the workplace to say things like that. And I used that in a competency-based interview, and I scored really highly on it. So that's just an example. That was a conversation in the canteen. So it's an example of how it can work really well. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure you'd agree, Ash. You don't need lots of work experience to be able to answer these questions. It's really just about presenting them well and expressing yourself. And you have all these values and skills within you. You just need to be able to express them correctly.
Definitely. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Everyone will have some sort of experience or, recollection of an incident that's happened where they perhaps can use that going forward as part of their interview prep and as one of their responses to these interview questions. One thing I like to do is kind of keep a journal. When something happens, you think if you're going for a job, it's good practice to do it anyway. I think keep a journal, almost a bit like a journal of interview evidence that you have there. You can be like, right, this was a really good situation. What potential competencies in the area I'm looking to go for could this hit? So you've at least got it written down in note form. You can make some notes. And then, when you do come to that interview prep, you've got something half ready to go. You've got a skeleton of an answer there ready to go.
Definitely. That's a great tip. Just when you do face these things and you do think that's a great example of a potential competency, get it down and it will make it 10 times easier when you get to a competency-based interview to have a list of examples you can look back on.
And sorry, I was just going to say, there's different methods, isn't there? Like, a journal might work for someone. I quite like a bit of both, journal and maybe like a mind map as well. So you can mind the competency and have like little spider diagrams going out with what you might be hitting. So it's whatever works for you, really, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I like little voice memos on my phone. I just record little voice memos when I think of things, and I keep a log of them there. Anything to just make this easier is a really good thing. And I think just also to remember that when you do have a competency-based question, there will be a specific question weaved within that competency. So it's really important that, as well as having a good example, that you answer the question that they are asking. Okay, I want you to all remember that, because it's really important. So as well as having a good example of a competency, you must answer the question. Really important for an interviewer. I'm sure Ash and I have been on interviews before. We've interviewed people where they've given a great example, but they haven't answered the question. And it's really frustrating, isn't it, Ash? Because it's a good example.
But if it was they choose the wrong evidence or the wrong example for that particular competency. So it's like, you can't score them, because obviously there's a grade in here, and the whole idea behind competency based interviewing, as we've discussed, is to make it fairer. So across a broad spectrum of candidates is a lot fairer, because you're actually grading them against a framework or a competence list of competencies. But they come up with an amazing example that you think, wow, yeah, that's great, but unfortunately I can't score you on any of these competency categories here or criteria, because it just doesn't fit the question being asked. So this is why it's really important, I think, to have that bank of potential answers, bank of that experience, evidence, knowledge that you've got, have that bank, so that then, you can almost pick them out, can't you? Your examples, and go, well, that one doesn't really fit with this question. If it means you take a deep breath, you take a sip of water, if there's water provided, whatever, you have a little think, let the cogs turn in the brain, think, right, well, which example do I need to use? There's nothing wrong in that. And I've done that numerous times. I'm sure you have as well, Pete. But you need to make sure you're picking the right example. And like you say, answering the goddamn question, because that's where people go wrong. Yeah,
definitely. It's very frustrating. And I think it is about giving yourself that time and to be adaptable to what question comes your way. it is a really good point there. Having that sip of water, having that pause. You're relaxed. You're in control, so you know you will answer how and when you want to answer. So that's really important as well.
Yeah, I mean, we'll touch upon kind of like interview behavioural techniques and that kind of stuff in a later episode. But it's well worth mentioning it here because it kind of is. It is very important, isn't it, when you're discussing the STAR method as well, because it's that physicality of being in that interview environment and how you're going to get your answers across. I think something else worth mentioning at this point is also if you can try and get in the mindset of the interviewer as well. Like, what would you want to hear if you were the person interviewing on the other side of the table, the other side of the room, whatever? You know, bearing in mind there could be, well, tens to hundreds of candidates going for this job potentially. So, you know, what would you want to hear and what's going to set you apart from the rest of the crowd? You know, if you've got a really good example, then maybe something a little bit niche or a little bit different, perhaps. If you've weaved it in the right way, it can be a really interesting, engaging answer for an interviewer to hear, and it kind of makes you sit up, doesn't it? I know we've had situations like that where we've interviewed people and you think, wow, that's a cracking example.
Yeah, definitely. And a really strong example really sets you apart from everyone else. It really does, because they might be interviewing 10 people, they might be interviewing 50 people, but it doesn't matter. You've got to just provide your best game and you've got to stand out from the crowd. That's what it's all about.
100%. And I know from my experience as well, when you do get a candidate that's got a really good example, it does stick in your mind. You do remember that, don't you? Like, you might interview another 10 people afterwards, but it will be that one that sticks in your mind. I think that's a great example, and that's almost sort of set the bar for that interview panel, hasn't it? Or for that, you know, that period of interviews. You've raised the bar there, and you think, well, that's what I'm marking everything towards now. Although you've got the competency framework, but you're kind of almost judging that as well, aren't you? And it's I think it's a really good thing to consider as well.
Definitely.
Right. So I think that was quite a good introduction to the STAR method and, you know, what competencies are and the competency category areas and kind of how these are used, particularly within the public sector. It's not to say you won't experience these in the private sector. A lot of kind of large corporations, you know, FTSE 100 companies are now starting to move over to the competency-based arena and questioning methods, because they are very successful and they do work and they do, like we say, give that element of fairness. No interview is ever going to be 100% fair, but it does kind of make a level playing field as best that there can be. Right, so let's actually move on to the STAR method itself, and we'll start with the first part, which is the S, the situation. So Pete, do you want to explain what this is all about, the situation? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, well, situation. So this is where you set your scene. So you have to imagine you're almost telling a story, really, and you're setting your scene and explaining the context of your example. So you want to mention things like, what was your position, like what was your role, like if it's a work-based example, what was your position in the company? What was if you're a sports club, what position did you hold there? If you're a volunteer, what position you were? What was happening within the company or sports club or volunteer sector at the time, sort of just give a wider context. So it was a busy time for our company. I've got an example. Say, I go back to my shoe shop example. I was the assistant manager of a shoe shop, and the company was in financial difficulty as it was losing stocks. So just something like that. That gives a really good illustration of what was happening. A really strong introduction. And make it vivid as well, because you want to bring the interviewer into this example. You want them to live it, basically. So make it as vivid as possible, and help them understand the background of your example. It's really important that you get this part right. It's something I think sometimes people they gloss over, but you have to remember the interviewer, this is their time to get to know you, and you've really got to explain the situation well, because the better you explain the situation, the better your actions will look of how you address it. So it's really important. I personally like to start with a really powerful introduction to any STAR method competency-based answer. I always think it's a good thing to just start with an introduction and to what this example demonstrates. Like a really strong, powerful introduction gets their attention and then helps set that scene as well.
Definitely. It's key, isn't it? Like you say, I think some people do sort of gloss over this and think, oh, well, I'm not going to score the marks particularly for that part. But it does, like you say, set the tone, set the context for the rest of your example. And if you don't do that, you've got to bear in mind, it's really hard for the interviewer. They're sat there, you know, they're trying to process something verbally and mark you to a competency framework or a score sheet they've got there. So like you say, if you can make that vivid and you can almost get them to be in your shoes for that example, that's going to make the rest of it flow really well, really naturally, and really enable them to get into the head of what it was like for you dealing with that problem or dealing with that situation that you're giving the evidence for. I think that's really, really key. And you know, the situation part of this needs to be given a bit more attention, I think, than some people care for a lot of the time.
Yeah, it starts making the example come to life. Basically, you've really got to illustrate that, and this is about again, I know we'll go into it in future podcasts, but this is about our building up our confidence and our being relaxed enough to kind of be yourself and loosen up and explain. Like you're going to be proud of this example, so you really want to set that scene and you want to give over this example with enthusiasm and make sure you're like, wow, it was a difficult situation because of this and this, and that's what's really important.
Yeah, completely agree. If you get this bit right, I think it almost calms you as well, doesn't it? When you're given the answer, because this bit you can't really mess this up, because you'll have it in your head. You'll be like, well, I know what I was doing because I worked in the shoe shop. I know I was the assistant manager. Like, how can I forget that? And yeah, we were in financial difficulty. We were losing stock by whatever percent or blah blah blah. But you know that, so this is the easier part of the example to give. So that will, you know, take a deep breath. That helps lower your heart rate, get really into it. And then the rest of the interview where you're actually giving the meatier part of your answer will just flow, I think. So
that's exactly it. That's a really good point as well. It's like, you were there. You're the one. Yeah. This is your example. You were there. It's from your perspective. You were there. You know the details. This is you presenting it. So that's a really good point there.
Definitely. So that situation, I think we've pretty much covered that. There's not really, you know, there's not really much more to add to that, I don't think, is there, Pete?
No.
You know. Okay, should we move on to task then? So what are we kind of getting across when we're talking about task in an interview example?
So again, it's really key. You have to explain what your task was, right? What you were trying to achieve and why you were trying to achieve it as well. So what and why, really important there. So, and include the importance of the task. Like, why was this task important? So just to go back to that shoe shop example. So you undertook a stock take of the shop because I wanted to trace where we were losing stock. If we could identify where we were losing stock, we could stop it and stop the company losing money. So just within that small kind of sentence there, I've illustrated what I was trying to achieve and why I was trying to achieve it. Again, it's quite subtle, quite nuanced, but I've put in there why and what I was trying to achieve. Really important, and the importance of the task. So I wanted to stop the company losing money and it was really important that we did that, because ultimately, if the company loses money, it might sink under. I don't have a job and loads of people lose their jobs. So really important we convey that properly, what our task was.
Yeah, 100%. It's really important, like the what and the why. Definitely. If you miss out one aspect of that, again, your example just falls down. So you really need to make sure you get both those in. I think this is also a really good part of the STAR method, where you can also instill your values as well. You know, like you said there, you know, I wanted to stop the company losing money because I care about my colleagues. You know, I care about, you know, you don't have to go into war and peace, but it's kind of, this is where you can start to weave in other aspects of the job description, the job role you're going for, and who you are as a person and how you resonate with a company's core values and their beliefs, which obviously, if you've done your homework and your research, which you should be doing, you know, looking thoroughly into the job, which again, we'll cover in a later episode, but, you know, doing your research on these organizations that you're going for, learning their values, you know, what are they about? How does that fit with you? And then you can start to weave these into these examples as well.
Definitely. It's a really good point. Yeah, weaving it in. Great point there, Ash.
again, like we said, task doesn't have to be War and Peace. It's literally punchy, short, concise, punchy, to the point. This was what it was. This was why we did it. This is what we're hoping to, achieve by it. So yeah, I think we've covered that really. So the next part of the STAR model is obviously the A, which stands for action. So this is where we're explaining what you did. So what you as the interviewee or the candidate has actually done. Do you want to provide a bit more context around that, Pete?
Yeah, this is the important part, to detail your actions. And I emphasize the your part of that. Don't ever take credit for the actions of others. People will be able to find that out. You're sounding sincere, you're sound disingenuous, and you do not want to come across as dishonest with an interview.
Well, you can see it a mile off, can't you, when someone's lying? And then they have that like mental shutdown, and you can just see like the cogs turn. And it's like, well, this isn't your example, is it, mate? Like, you didn't do this.
Definitely.
And I think it really shows. And I always think as well, sorry, we're going off a bit of a tangent here, but it's probably worth mentioning. That's not a good way, is it, to start on a lying footing, on a foundation built on lies for your career? I think it's not a good first impression to leave.
Any interviewer worth their salt will see through that a mile off. There's no harm in doing an example where you worked with other people. I'm not saying that, and like plenty of examples. You'll never do like everything by yourself. It's not. We're not saying that, and it's really important to give yourself enough credit. But equally, you make sure that you communicate your actions, what you did, not what anyone else did, not what don't ever take that credit, because as Ash says, people will see it a mile off. It's a terrible way to start in a company, and you won't get the job, frankly, because people will see through it.
Well, who wants to employ someone who's going to lie? That's the crux of it, isn't it?
Exactly. But equally though, it's not a time to be modest. You're the main protagonist in your example. It's your example, okay? And like, say 2 or 3 of you contributed to a really good bit of work. Not a problem. But you just make sure that you just show what you did. So again, using the shoe shop analogy. So I would say something like, I worked with all the different departments within the company to trace where the stock was missing. I organized an initial strategy meeting. Then I delegated tasks to my team. I asked my colleagues in the relevant departments to supply me with the information I needed to complete this task. Things like that. So again, I haven't said that I've done everything myself, but I've said how I did it. And I think remember within your actions, what is the competency? What is the competency? What are they wanting you to show that you can do? Is it teamwork? Is it leadership? As we've said before, no point in having a great competency if you've a great example where you've achieved something, it's impressive, but it doesn't hit the competency. You need to work your example into the competency, so you're hitting those parts that you need to score the marks. Okay. And that example you just gave there, Pete, I mean, already, all that's quite brief and succinct. You could already see the 2 competencies you were hitting there, which would have been sort of teamwork and leadership. Yeah, exactly. So it really is about being that blatant and that obvious with what you're trying to convey here, isn't it? Yeah. And I think what sometimes people don't realize in a competency-based interview is you do a lot of these things. You will meet with your teammates and discuss a strategy. You'll have done that, but you probably won't even realize that you've done it. But if you write it in the correct way by having an initial strategy meeting, it sounds so much more positive than I stood with my mate and we discussed it for 5 minutes. No, that's not what you did. And again, it's just writing it in the way that that comes across well to the interviewer. That you will have done most of these things in the competency. You just need to realize that you have and be able to illustrate it correctly. It's probably a good point actually to talk about, how your use of sort of like powerful or action verbs can help here as well. Definitely. Just to make it more concise, make your example more concise, and sort of chop down a bit of blur that you just spurt out, and it sounds a lot better as well. It flows a lot better. So that example you just used there about your colleagues, you might have been stood around the water cooler having a chat, but you made some decisions there, didn't you? You did.
maybe you did say, yeah, let's we go out and have a chat. Well, yeah, you have organised a meeting. Yeah, it might not be a conventional meeting that people think around a boardroom or whatever, but you have organised a meeting. And did you get some sort of actionable action out of it or result? Yeah, you did. So let's big yourself up about it. Let's, like you said earlier, let's it's not time to be modest. Let's say, no, I did this. This is what I did. And this is where you can use some different words, isn't it? So rather than just sort of saying, oh, yes, sometimes I used to speak with my colleagues around the water cooler and we'd have a chat about how we could, save money. Well, why not change that to, I arranged a strategy meeting with my colleagues where I persuaded them to look at different things we could implement to save money or something like that, Yeah. That was off the top of my head. Obviously, it'd be a little bit more detail, but you can see how just by changing a few of those key words, adding those sort of verbs in, those action words, you can really make things sound a lot better and make your example a lot meatier.
Yeah, you want that example to come to life, and you want it to be meaty to have. You want it to be meaty to be able to sort of illustrate it properly for the interviewer. I mean, something that I usually do with these interviews, if I was going, or when I have gone through competency-based interviews, I normally have a few key hooks in my mind of points that I want to get across. So then I can talk quite conversationally, but I'm getting in the points that I want that hit those competency marks. So I make little sort of hooks in my mind that I'll hook a conversation around and then convey that properly. Again, using those words that Ash has just described there, because it's a lot more impactful, and you have to be succinct in this as well. You don't want to you don't want to bore the interviewer. You want to make them feel that they're in your example and they're alive to the example. That's a really good point.
I like the what you're saying there, Pete, around the hooks, because I think that's a really good way of almost like having way markers in your interview, like your example. Yeah. So you kind of right, well, I've got that hook, tick it off like in your head. Yeah, I've done that. Right. Okay. I know where I am now. So, if you have got nerves, a bit of anxiety, you're struggling a little bit, you can get back on track quite quickly, can't you? Because no, I've done all right here. I know I've said that. And it's almost like you've got that chronological order in your head of your example and you know where you're at. So I think it really helps with those that might be suffering from the a bit more nervousness or anxiety than some people do.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're completely right. And I think, actually, a lot of people really fear the competency-based interview. However, if you look at it from the other perspective, you kind of know the area that they're going to talk about, so you can pre-plan a lot of these questions and have that example. So, and it does help settle the nerves. Again, we're going to go through mindfulness and interview anxiety. It's what we're about. But I think this clear preparation, a STAR model, can really, really just help calm those nerves, because it gives you a really good structure. And the human mind is good at working with structure. If you learn something, it's easy to you don't ever want to just repeat and splurt it out like a robot, but you do want to be able to hit those main points in your mind. That's why I talk about these little hooks, having these hooks in your mind that you can frame a conversation around, because then it sounds natural, but you're equally going through a plan in your head.
Yeah, I think that's great. And this is probably a pretty poor analogy, but it's almost as if like the structure is, imagine like a structure of a tent. You've got like your metal poles and all that and your rods. That's the core foundation of your interview example, isn't it? So there's certain things you're definitely going to want to get put across during this interview. And then, you put the cover on top, and then you put the guide ropes on and all the other bits and bobs for the tent. That's kind of like the meatier bit that you can kind of ad lib in some respects, because it's your evidence. You were there, you did it. So probably, I find a lot of time you sat there in an interview and you come up with stuff you hadn't even thought about when you were planning your interview. So as long as you have structure in place, and you, like you say, you have those little hooks or those things you definitely want to get across, and you've got that. It's not a script, it's a structure, like you said, Pete. We don't want to be, monotone. I did this, I did it. That's not going to score you high marks. You need to be, coming across naturally and flowing. But I think that's a really good way of structuring the interview. And like you said earlier, it will help reduce those interview nerves. Yeah,
definitely. I think you'll be a bit more settled, because you'll know you'll know what you want to say. You'll know what you're about. You're proud of your example, and you'll know what you want to say. You'll know what you want to get across. You want to get across those hooks, and that's what you need to do. So yeah, I think it's a really good way of looking at it.
Excellent. So that was action, and this is probably, I would say, where you're going to score the majority of your marks, isn't it? The action's kind of the meaty part.
Yeah.
That's where you're going to be picking up your core competencies and stuff. So you probably want to make this a little bit longer than the other parts. Would you say, Pete?
Yeah, definitely. No, you're completely right. I think that is where you're going to score most of your marks, because the interviewer wants to know what you did, how you did it, why you did it, what your motivations were. And that's where you can really put that across. Yeah, it's a really good point, and that is where you'll get most of your marks.
Excellent. Right. So moving on to the last part of the STAR method, which is R, which stands for result. So why do we need to mention results then, Pete? What's the deal with that? Why is that relevant?
Well, if you think what if you're going to tell a great story of like of a bit of work or something you're really proud of, I think it would be really disappointing if you didn't have a good ending to it. If it didn't have a good ending to it, so
it's like going to a movie and just like walking out 3/4 of the way, isn't it? And being like,
exactly.
Oh, I don't know what happened because I walked out. Like,
exactly, and the end was just terrible. The middle was great, but the end was terrible. So a good solid result is really important. And yeah, let's try and make it a good result. Don't try not to pick an example where you didn't achieve your goal, because it's not. It sounds an obvious point, but it's really not going to sound as good.
No, we've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen people, they do their situation, they do the task, they do the action. You're thinking, yeah, this is great. This is really good. It's going to be really good. Now, what did you do? What happened? And you almost like can't wait for the ending. And it's like, it just went really flat. It's like, It's like you've watched 6 seasons of like the best show ever, and then the final episode is just total crap.
Yeah,
it's almost like that. And it's such a letdown.
Exactly, it is a letdown, and as an interview, you do get into you're invested into the story, you're invested into the example, and you want to have a good ending, don't you? You want to have a good ending.
Everyone like a good ending, don't they?
Exactly.
I never said happy ending, but that could be construed wrong. But you do want a good ending to a story.
Exactly, you do, you really do, and I think if you can give a quantifiable result, it's amazing. If you can say something. So like to go back to the shoe shop example, from my actions, we're able to recover 70% of our lost stock, which increased my company's profit by 30%. So a really good quantifiable ending to that anecdote and that example there. That is probably the best thing, if you can evidence a tangible result. It doesn't have to be in terms of percentages or sales or whatnots. You could say something like that when I challenged someone, they went on it then set my company to have training about awareness of what comments were right and professional for the workplace, etc. Something like that. It could be like, after I highlighted this health and safety problem, all the fire extinguishers in the company were changed, and everyone received health and safety training, something like that. And that can be a really good result as well. It's something that, again, is attention grabbing and quantifiable. That's what the word I want you to remember with this: a quantifiable result, a good result. And as well, I think another really impacted thing to say in your result is what you've learned from the experience as well, which
Definitely.
shows
Key.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, me and Ash are doing this because we've learned from our experiences. That's why we know about the STAR model. That's why we know about competency-based interviews, because we've been through them, we've done through them, we've messed up in them. I'm sure, Ash, you've got some horrendous experiences, as have I, that we'll detail in our future podcasts. And that's what it's about: learning from that experience, reflecting, and building upon that experience, and the result is a place to do that. So you can say, profits were up 70%, and I learned from this that I'm actually a strong leader that can organize a team. It's just something like that. And from then I've gone to do leadership training within my company. Something like that is an incredible thing to say. It doesn't have to be as
powerful, isn't it?
It's very powerful, yeah.
And if you know you've got someone there, you've got a candidate that is, not only are they're ticking all the right boxes around the competencies, but also they're self-aware. They are self-aware of their weaknesses and their strengths and their weaknesses, and where they can develop and they want to develop. That's a key thing, and I think that's going to come across as a really good. When you're up against different candidates and you've got someone that is self-aware and they understand, where their strengths and weaknesses lie, and they've demonstrated that no, they have learned from this experience and this is what they did. I think for me, if I'm scoring someone an interview, I'm going to be giving them the higher marks because they're ticking a lot of boxes there, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, someone that can reflect on something they've done and take the good and the bad from it and the learning from it is so valuable to an organization. It really is, because it's the sort of people they want. Someone that can reflect and someone that can is self-aware. That's what people want. It's really important.
And there's nothing wrong in, it's quite good to show a little bit of vulnerability there as well, I think. So it personalizes it, humanizes it. You know, you're not a robot, like I said earlier, that's just spilling off a monotone script. No, invest some emotion into this. Again, it doesn't have to be War and Peace, but like you say, if you can reflect on something and you can show how you developed, then that is again a great result. If you might have an example that doesn't have that tangible result, like a percentage or a cost saving, time saving, or whatever. You might not have that. Whereas the learning outcome, the result might have been, well, actually, no, I this is what I learned. I went on to do this, and this is how I've reflected on what I've developed. So that's a really good way of, examples where there's not necessarily that quantifiable result.
Definitely. I think the result is really important. That's what's gonna a good result is going to stick in their mind.
It's the lasting impression.
Yeah, it's the lasting impression, and it can be the difference. I say, as I've said, the action gets you the scores, but the result might tip you over the edge in terms of scoring, and it's going to give that lasting impression of you as well. It just tops off an example so well. If you can give a good result, that will stick with an interviewer. It really will.
Most definitely. So that's the STAR model there. Is there anything you want to add for a result? I think we've kind of covered that.
Yeah, I think we're good with that. I think it's just like, as I say, impactful and let it stick with the interviewer. You're proud of it, and you just let that emotion and that enthusiasm show.
Yeah. You should be proud of. I always find if you prepare well, not only does it help with your nerves and your anxiety, but you will be proud of your examples. You'll want to get it out, won't you? You'll actually want to go to the interview and start spurting it out. And if you do it right, once you get going, you won't want to stop. And then you'll come out of the interview, even if you don't get the job, you'll be feeling really positive, because you'll be like, no, I remember that. No, I did do that. I did do really well. That was a really good example. And no, I do know what I'm on about. I have got the skills, and I can get this job. And I think it just makes you, from a personal morale boosting point of view, it really helps as well.
Definitely.
Excellent. Right. So there we go. That's the STAR method, or STAR model, however you want to refer to it. It's a really good way, like we've said, of answering a competency-based question and using it in competency-based interviews. We try and I would say you really want to keep your examples around no longer than 4 to 5 minutes. It's probably the kind of ballpark figure you want to stick to here. If you go any longer, you're not going to get, the interview is not going to be able to ask you the other questions, so you're potentially going to lose marks because you're going on too long. Like we said, this model is really good at reducing your anxiety, because it can give you that sort of pre-prepared structure for you to latch all your interview experience and examples and answers onto. But you do need to be careful with this as well. Like we said, be flexible and be able to adapt depending on what question you've given. Which, if you've got a bank full of examples, this is where this comes, isn't it, Pete? So if you if you're looking at the competency framework, if you can get hold of that, you can there's only so many ways they can ask a question. It'll just be reworded in a certain way. So if you have got that bank of examples ready to go, you can kind of pick them out, can't you? And go, well, that example doesn't really work well with this question, but I've got one in the bank that I can use.
And as well with competency based, think about what angle they can come at you with a competency. But you'll have the competency there. You'll see the competency. Think about what angles they want to come at you with. Ash and I can help you with specific examples in more detail. But yeah, think about what angles they can come at you with in a competency based interview.
Yeah, and also just make sure you're weaving in those skills, those values, and don't be afraid to be creative with your language as well. Like we said, use those action verbs. In fact, I think it's probably a good idea, Pete. We can create some sort of like, not cheat sheet, but a sheet of like different verbs that are really good to use in an interview, and we'll put that up on the Facebook group and get that out for the listeners. So that will really help. And like we said earlier, make sure you answer the question. Because you don't be sat there 5 minutes giving all this amazing evidence, but it doesn't actually meet the criteria of the question being asked. It's not hitting the competencies. So that's really important. And there's one thing I want to just end with, what helps me personally, and you might have a tip as well that you want to leave as a lasting note. One thing I do when I like to type out, I start off with a mind map with a competency, and I come off of that and I write, like you said, Pete, what could they in theory ask me? What a competency is being assessed, and I come off that. I do a little mind map, and then I start to type something up into not a script, keep it quite natural and flowing, but it is sort of like, I did this, blah 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 blah. A lot of I did, what I did. Like you say, not the time to be modest. No, it's what you did. You're the one sat there. It's your evidence. It's your example. And then I don't know if this works for you, Pete, but I like to use highlighters. So I like to go through my example so that I know that I'm hitting the star method, and I'm hitting all the right points, the situation, task, action, result. I'll give each one of those a different color of highlighter. So in my example, I know, right, yeah, that's the bit that's talking about the situation. Yeah, I've definitely hit the point on the task. Yeah, done the action, done the review. And you can also do it for the competencies as well. So you're hitting it's just something that works for me. Everyone's got their own thing that works for them, but give it a go. It might be something that helps you and helps you structure your answer. Is there any tips you've got, Pete, or anything that works for you?
My main tip I've already said, but like, use the word I, don't use the word we in an example. Use that. And yeah, I would once, what I do are very similar to Ash. I write it all down, and then I break it down into bullet points to remember, to make it easier to remember. So I'll write a whole essay about my example, and then what I'll do is chop it down into bullet points so I can remember. So I like to get it all out on the page. I like to free flow write, get my example, my situation, task, action, result out onto a page, sort of essay style, and then I'll work on breaking it down and then putting it into bullet points so I can remember it. And then I'll work on remembering those bullet points. I'll use color coding as well to remember those bullet points. And then I like to learn by sort of hearing things. I'll start talk it out. I'll listen to it. I'll have it on my earphones and listen to my bullet points, so it gets into my memory, into my subconscious. So then when I do talk, I've got those hooks in my mind that I can express out. It comes out in a conversational style because it's in my subconscious. It's in my mind. I know what I want to say, and I say it with confidence and with enthusiasm. That's great. I love it. Yeah, 100% agree with what you said there. Bullet points. Listen to yourself, practice. It's the age-old saying, practice does make perfect. Get yourself in front of the mirror, listen to yourself, practice your interview examples, and you will interview with confidence, and you will get that job that you deserve. So thanks for your time today, Pete. Really good episode. Hopefully, for the listeners, you've got some value out of that. If you have, please make sure you're subscribing to our social media channels and spreading the word. Share this podcast, and drop us some comments on our Facebook group. If you're not part of the Facebook group, join the Facebook group. Let's get the conversation going. Let's try and reduce those interview anxiety and nerves. And we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you. We hope you found today's episode useful. If you did, then please be sure to leave a review, share and subscribe. You can also join our Facebook community by searching the Grad Guys
and also by checking out thegradguys.com. See you next time.